You kind of juggle your role with MMA fighting, which is obviously an independent MMA outlet that covers MMA. And then obviously your more official role with the UFC and Fox, where you do the analyst work and also interviewing. I've noticed, for example, on the MMA beat, maybe a little bit to my surprise, that sometimes you will present your viewpoint, which isn't necessarily pro-UFC, or maybe with an angle that not undermining the UFC, but certainly giving a balanced perspective on things. Is that a fair assessment? And have you broached this topic with the UFC to say, you know, am I allowed to give my independent viewpoint on things when I'm on the MMA fighting outlet?
Well, first of all, I would hope that's the case. I would hope that I'm giving you a balanced perspective and an unbiased perspective. I mean, I work for Fox, who's the broadcast partner of the UFC. When I am on UFC Tonight, I know you don't get that here, but you might see the clips from time to time. I mean, we do a segment called Fighter versus Writer. We debate things often, and I'm not always in favor of the UFC. I don't think that's expected of me. You know, if you're someone who covers the sport for BT Sport in Europe, or if you cover the NBA for ESPN, I mean, it doesn't mean that just because you work for the broadcast partner, you have to always be like, rah, 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 you know, everything's right. I mean, there are always things that you're going to disagree with, as long as you present them, you know, your opinions with fact, and, you know, you're informed, and you're not just out there bashing for the sake of bashing. I don't think anyone minds. No one's ever told me that something that I've said on the MMA Hour or the MMA Beat was inappropriate or crossed the line, because I'd like to think that, again, I'm unbiased, and I present both sides of the argument fairly. Now, sometimes people will say, well, you know, you talk too much about the UFC. Why don't you talk? I mean, the gap between the UFC and every other organization is massive. If you don't recognize that, then you're kind of kidding yourself. But I do like to think that on the two shows that I'm on for MMAfighting.com, we cover the sport very fairly and equally, from the Bellator pay-per-view to World Series of Fighting, you know, to other events as well. So that's something that I definitely pride myself in, and I hope that people will view me as an MMA journalist as opposed to just a UFC journalist, because I like to think that I cover the entire sport that way.
Absolutely, yeah. And then moving on to the MMA Beat specifically, obviously it's a show that
you like it.
I'm a massive fan of the MMA Beat. It's become a staple in my MMA viewing, and I imagine for the majority of hardcore MMA fans, and even a few casual fans as well, I think it's something they tune into on a weekly basis when it is filmed weekly. What's the panel on there? I mean, I don't want to get you in trouble here by saying anything that would annoy anyone, but what's the panel that gets the best feedback in terms of, you know, because I have my favourites that I like to see on there. I'm fond of Chuck. I think Chuck, and I know he makes you laugh as well. I see he makes you chuckle regularly. Yeah,
I am a huge Chuck Mindenhall fan. I think he is arguably the best writer. You can make a very good case that he is the best writer in MMA right now. I am so happy that he has joined our team, and I think he's just brilliant. I mean, the stuff that he's done over the past year since joining us, he's only been with us for essentially a year, just outstanding work. So I think he's tremendous, and I really love working with him, and I think he's really grown into his own as a on-camera personality as well, because it's tough to go from just a writer to that. So I totally agree with that one. Who's your next one?
Absolutely. And then, of course, Luke, because his vocabulary is just immense.
Luke is a very interesting character. He is, one might say he is the anchor of the show, because, you know, he has such strong personality. He has such a strong personality, he has such a strong opinion on everything. You know, he doesn't mince words. He's got the nice vocabulary. He's got a strong presence. He's well-versed. He's knowledgeable. You know, Luke is one of those guys who I think some people, I think he's also grown into his own as well, but I think, you know, you might love him, you might dislike him, you might feel, but you have an opinion on that guy. You know, he brings that out in you, and I think that's very important as well. So yeah, he's a very important part of the show.
Absolutely. And then my third one.
Yeah. Who's the fourth member of the team? I'm assuming I would be. Okay.
Of course. So the fourth would be Jeff for me. I obviously, the man with the shirt. Shirt aside, I just find his very kind of relaxed, laissez-faire approach, and I do. He's a very chilled out character. He's very cool. So if I was to have a dream team quartet on the panel, it would be you four guys. Well,
I appreciate that. I think Jeff is great as well. He's really brought a great perspective, more of a veteran approach. He's been doing this longer than us, but he's young at heart, and I really enjoy it. I love that quartet as well. I think as a unit, we've had a lot of fun and we have good chemistry. I will also mention that Mike Chiappetta, I think, does a great job, and I hope that he will remain in MMA media for many, many years to come. And I got to give him props. For some reason, the people like New York Rick. I don't know why. I don't know what's up with him, but the people really like him. And I will say that while he was suppressed, and I think this was probably a good thing for him, even though he wouldn't admit it, his debut was fantastic. He blew me away, and his return trip was great as well, equally great. So he's done very well. We've had other people come and go. Who I think has been doing very well? I don't know if anyone even cares about this discussion, but hey, we're having fun. Mark Ramundi has done a really good job on the show as well. He works for FoxSports.com, so yeah, it's fun. I've always loved the show The Sports Reporters. We have a show in the United States called The Sports Reporters, and it's been around for many, many years, maybe 30 years or so. And it's essentially that, 4 journalists sitting around talking about the hot topics of the week in sports. So ours is just about MMA, but there's so much craziness that goes on in our sport. It feels like we always have so many topics to talk about each week. I wish we could do it every week, but when I'm away, I can't. But still, I'm really happy that people like it, and I hope we get to do it for many years to come. A lot of people say they want to see it on TV, and that would be awesome. But part of the cool thing about the show is no breaks, no commercials. We can go as long as we want, and that's the beauty of the internet as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you sort of alluded to it before as well with the kind of, on the MMA Hour for a while, you had the Mitchell Minute, the McCorkle, I can't remember, what was the label of that one? I can't remember.
He tried to take it as well, the McCorkle Minute.
It's McCorkle Minute. Is there any, obviously you tend to build a rapport with a fighter, you'll realise they get positive feedback and they're humorous, and then you'll run with it and do it sort of weekly or every couple of weeks. Has there been anyone recently where people have said you need to get this guy on for a weekly minute?
Oh. We kind of evolved from the minute. There's no one, there's people that, here's my biggest fear. I got to tell you something, I'll be honest with you, I never really said this to anyone. Right before every MMA Hour show, I kind of have like a panic attack, like, oh, I suck at this. Why am I doing this? I'm the worst at this. Why are people watching this? Who is watching this other than my mom? And I go through like these mix of emotions, and that's Monday. Now Thursday is when I start to think about the Monday show, and I'm like, who am I going to get on the show? It's going to be the worst show ever. How am I going to top last week's show? I go through this mix of emotions. There's Ian McCall, another good guest on the MMA Hour. Anyway, so I go through these emotions. How am I going to top it? And it all always comes into place, and I just always try to make the show the best shows. This is a long answer to your question about a reoccurring guest on the show, but there's no one that really comes to mind these days. I just always try to make the show as entertaining, as fun as possible. And after the show is over, like at around the 4-hour mark, I start to feel like a guy has been punched in the face like 1,000 times, because I start to get loopy, slur my words. And then that night when I get home, I can hardly speak. I'm so exhausted from talking. No breaks. No breaks. I don't know if you know this, but there's no breaks. I don't know why I do it. No one has told me to do it that long. It could have been just an hour, and everyone, I think, would have been okay with it. But for some reason, I keep wanting to do more and more and more. And I kind of think, all right, I'll give you 4 hours or so. Last week, I think it was like 4:15. And you can listen to that throughout the week. And then by the time you're done, it'll be Monday again, and we'll do it again all over again. So that's my thing. And I love that, I get people who come up to me and say that they like the show. Awesome. I really enjoy doing it. It's fun. It's just free format. Interviews, that's what I love.
Absolutely, yeah. And I wanted to broach a couple of topics that actually came up on last week's MMA Beat. I wanted to ask you, obviously, because when you're on the panel, you're sort of posing the questions more than providing your opinion. One really interesting and relevant topic, I think, at the moment is the UFC's rate of expansion and the significant increase in the number of events. And some fans sort of bemoaning that maybe the fact that certain events are diluted as a result of that. And you were talking, and the panel kind of expressed unanimously that potentially, there is a slightly watered down product, but on the flip side, the UFC has to grow this thing globally. What's your opinions? Do you think that ultimately this strategy will pay dividends?
I think it will. You can only determine the dividends that it will pay the next time, you see, a lot of this is for TV. You know, the UFC has a great contract with Fox in the United States, and they're contracted to put on around 30-something events, and it's a tremendous deal. It's a history-making deal as far as MMA in the United States is concerned. And then here they have local deals. They have a deal here in Ireland. They have BT Sport, obviously, and they have deals all over the country. And they're bringing these events here because if you don't have TV, it's very hard. I mean, I know in Germany they don't have it. It's a very rare case. If you don't have TV building up the events, and then you come to the event, that's the model. You come to the event afterwards, after there's a build-up, after there's the Ultimate Fighter, all that stuff. Then you put it on, and then hopefully you sell at the arena. So my point is, once these contracts are up, then we'll see how this is doing, because those Fox events are bought and paid for. These events, as far as TV is concerned, are bought and paid for. The ones that are strictly for Europe or any other part of the country outside of the United States. The next time around, the next time there are negotiations, will the rate go up? Will the deal be more? Will they see more value in the product? Or when they go to the negotiation table, they sit down, will the broadcast partner say, we want less, and then we'll pay less? We're only, 2.5 years in. I think it started in 2012, so we're around 2.5 years in. I think it's a little too early to say. And, I believe them when they say, these events are, for the local audience. That's why it's on, at night here and in the afternoon back home in the United States. But it is being presented to everyone, and if you're a hardcore fan, it is a lot. Back in the day, when the UFC was on, you had to watch it. And then you kind of looked at who was fighting on the card. Now I talk to fans and they're like, well, who's fighting? Oh, this card, I could skip that one. And that's a dangerous game. It's a slippery slope. When I used to be a pro wrestling fan, and then they had this brand extension, Raw and SmackDown, around like 14 years ago, that's when I started, they had 2 pay-per-views a year. That's when I started to lose interest, because it's just, once you get in the habit of skipping things, it can be very dangerous for the business. So I think that they have to be very careful if they want it to remain as popular as it is. But I think we'll only truly find out if the product is oversaturated once the new contracts are up, and if the rates go up, that means they made the right call. If the gates go up, that means they made the right call. Right now, I think it's too early. We're in the infancy of this global expansion. I mean, think about it. Last year, they had 33 events. This year, it's going to be around 48, 49. That's a huge jump. We're only in July. I think it's too soon to say whether or not this has been a failure or a success.
Absolutely, yeah, make a lot of valid points there, and I wondered as well, because Dana obviously refers to mixed martial arts, and obviously he talks very passionately, and he strongly believes that mixed martial arts, it's in its infancy and it will continue to grow, but he firmly believes that it will go on to become the biggest sport in the globe. It's in our DNA, as he likes to say. I've heard him sort of compare it to the appeal of soccer in some ways, and obviously we've just seen the World Cup, and the global appeal of soccer, football, is undisputed, it's unrivaled. Do you think, maybe 50 years down the line, 100 years, that potentially it could be right up there with the most popular sports on the globe?
I've never believed that MMA would be bigger than the Big Four, and for me, the Big Four is the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, and the NFL in the United States. And the NFL is by far the #1 sport. Now, that's just in the United States. That's the Big Four in the United States. The one that is above all of those is obviously soccer. I mean, it's, as you mentioned, it's not even close. It's gigantic. So forget about soccer. I'm talking about the other four. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. There's always going to be a portion of society that doesn't like seeing men fighting in a cage. And I don't know why we are so obsessed with trying to convert everyone into a fan. Yeah. Not everyone has to like this. Not everyone has to be an MMA fan. Of course, you want as many fans as possible. You want the sport to grow, but just because, we're not on this newspaper or that channel doesn't mean the sport isn't successful or even mainstream. At the end of the day, it is fighting in a cage, and people aren't going to like that. They're not going to like seeing women fighting in a cage. It's just the fact, like people don't like boxing. They might not like this. I actually have a hard time watching American football these days because I find it very violent. Amazingly, I cover this, and I find that almost even more barbaric than mixed martial arts. But I just feel like there's a ceiling. I don't know how high that ceiling is, but I certainly know that it's not higher than soccer. It's just, I have a son. He's 2 years old. He's playing soccer. we take him to a class every Saturday. We're not taking him to MMA. You're not going to do that. They can't grasp it. You know, they're playing these sports at such a young age that, you know, this is a little more it's a little more complicated. And kids can start 5, 6, 7 years old. I'm all for that, but I always think there's going to be a certain group of people that don't like it, and that will preclude it from being bigger than all those other sports.
Yeah, absolutely. And another topic that, well, I suppose it's been touched upon.
And by the way, I just want to say something. It's somewhat of a crazy statement, but it's also part of Dana's brilliance. You know, when he comes to Canada and he says GSP is going to be a bigger star than Wayne Gretzky. I don't know if you know who Wayne Gretzky is, the hockey legend. We don't really realize it, but subconsciously, he's throwing out these wild claims, and we talk about him, and here we are talking about him, and it's just another way of getting the discussion about the sport out there. So maybe deep down he doesn't believe it, but it's doing its job. People are talking about it and debating it, and at the end of the day, that's all a promoter wants.
Absolutely, I hadn't thought about that angle. That's true. Yeah, so something that you talk about quite often now on the MMA beat is the Ultimate Fighter, and again, you know, the UFC is taking it globally now, but I think a lot of MMA fans, you kind of jovially joke about it, some of the panel, that they don't really find it essential viewing anymore, shall we say. And a lot of fans as well think that the format's grown a little bit stale, a bit stagnant. Do you think there's anything that they can do to jazz it up, or do you think it's just a matter of putting them on less frequently in the States to rejuvenate that interest in it?
I definitely think they should be on less frequently in the States. You know, you think about it, the Ronda Rousey series, Tough 18, was on. It ended end of November. Then a month later, they put Tough Nations on Fox Sports 1. And then a month after that, they had Tough 19. And, you know, in less than 2 months is going to be Tough 20. Now I'm really interested in Tough 20 because they're fighting for a belt, and these are 16 of the best strawweights in the world. It's a new weight class. It's interesting, but I think I didn't want to see Gilbert and Anthony as coaches. I wanted to see every woman for herself. I didn't think that you needed the gimmick of the coaches. I really think that it needs, after this season, a fresh coat of paint. I mean, that's 20 seasons, not to mention the other ones, Brazil and all that stuff. It's just, you know, and here's the other thing. There's so much UFC on these days. Back in the day when there was one pay-per-view a month and the odd Spike show usually was coupled with the premiere or the finale, the Ultimate Fighter was a fresh thing on this is a little more UFC. We didn't have any studio shows. We didn't have all these other fight nights. It was fresh. The times have changed. You know, the fight nights have almost become the Ultimate Fighter. You know, that's why you can't find, you know, back in the day when you had 20 or so events, even less, there were all these great athletes available just dying to get into the UFC. Now a lot of them are already in the UFC. UFC caliber doesn't mean the same thing as it meant 5, 6, 7 years ago, because guys are getting in a little early. Think of a fighter like Jessamine Duke. She lost on Wednesday to Leslie Smith. She probably got into the UFC a little early, but she got into the Ultimate Fighter. She won on the finale, and she got in. I'd like to see them, you know, now use these relationships that they have with the Invictas, send her back down there like a farm system, cultivate her talent, develop her, and then bring her back up. That's how I feel like this sport can evolve. The Ultimate Fighter, unless you're introducing a new weight class every time, I just don't know if there's enough talent to keep the interest up there. And the whole concept of the coaches and all that, I just think we've been there, we've done that. It needs a fresh coat of paint.
And when you say a fresh coat of paint, I mean, you know, sort of in terms of generating ideas, because I know for a while they tried the live format, didn't necessarily work.
I think that's the answer.
No, and then obviously they brought the families in to watch the preliminary fights to get into the house. You know, they have sort of tweaked and tried ideas. I mean, what idea specifically that you've conjured up do you think could potentially rekindle the interest?
Well, first off, I will say I still think it has value overseas. You know, in Latin America or in Brazil, I still think it has value there. As far as North America is concerned, because that's what I know best, I just think it's been there, done that, because we've seen it for 20 seasons almost. You know, here's the thing. It's always in the same location, the same gym, the same jerseys, the same format with the coaches. I really think you need to kind of blow it up. I love the idea of a comeback season. I've said this many, many times, because there are so many ex-UFC fighters out there these days that I really think that you can put on a compelling show with fighters who we already know about. You know, we've seen these guys. We know that's why I love the season 4 so much, because we knew about these guys, and now there's even more of them out there as free agents. Now, will that, you know, is that the answer? No, because that would only be good for really, you know, 1 season, maybe 2. I think, honestly, maybe a break is the best answer. But if we must have a reality show, you know, something where it's, you know, they're in their gyms and then it's like a tournament and then they meet. It's almost like you're just televising what really happens, you know, in the UFC, but you put it together for a reality show. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you got the SBG guys and then you have the Team Rhino guys, and they come together, and that's how you do it. Because otherwise, I just don't think it's, I just don't think there's enough interest there. And, you know, again, there's so many UFC events that I don't know if it's needed as much as it was once needed domestically. And when I talk domestically, I'm talking North America. Definitely think there's still value overseas to help introduce people, to help find new talent in China and in India when they do it there, in Latin America. But I think they've done a good job of finding all the talent in North America, and it's leaving them with not a lot of great talent in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a sort of 2-part question, really. In Europe, we're craving a UFC champion. We've never had a European UFC champion, and we think that obviously that also might help propel the sport forward even further. Obviously, you've got Alexander Gustafsson in the rematch with John Jones, so he's certainly the nearest to contend for that accolade. First of all, do you think Alexander could become the first European champion? And if not Alexander, is there anyone on the horizon? Conor obviously could be one in the mix that you think might vie for that accolade?
Well, certainly Alexander, because he's just, you know, he's 1 punch away at this point. He's the one who has the title shot. I don't think Alexander was robbed in their first fight. I thought it was a tremendous fight. I thought it was a fight of the year. It was one of the greatest fights I've ever seen. But I think John Jones won that fight. And it was a very close fight, and I think both men performed amazingly, and I can't wait for the rematch. He obviously has the best chance right now because he is so close. You know, he's the one who has a title fight next. So he definitely has a chance. I mean, he almost did it the first time. Now, I'm very curious to see how John Jones reacts after everything that happened this year, after everyone doubting him, after everyone kind of acting like Alexander won maybe a moral victory. I want to see how John Jones responds, because I do think he was a little banged up going into that fight, and I do think he kind of took the fight a little lightly. So Alexander has a great chance. You know, Conor he obviously has a rise. I don't know if he's going to get that title before 2014, but kudos to him for believing that. But he's, you know, he's certainly in the mix. I'd like to see him get this win, and, you know, I think a fight against Dustin Poirier would make a lot of sense next for him. And then if you beat Dustin Poirier, you're pretty close, you know. So let's see what happens there. You know, Brad Pickett I find very interesting because he does have a win over Mighty Mouse, but Ian McCall is a very tough fight as well. I thought that if Brad Pickett would have won this fight, they would have done that fight against Mighty Mouse, just because he has a win over Mighty Mouse. It's a very sellable fight, and that's what Demetrius Johnson needs right now. But maybe he'll still get it. Right now, he's going to fight Chris Carriasso on August 30th. As far as other Europeans, I mean, Bisping, he has a bit of a road to get there coming off of the last loss. You know, and middleweight has become very tricky these days. And I actually think that's actually one of the great travesties, I think, of the last 10 or so years of the UFC, the fact that Michael Bisping never got a title shot. I truly think that, you know, you look at some of his fights, and he always had that big fight that he couldn't get past, you know, the Chael Sonnen fight, which some people think he won, the Dan Henderson fight, you know, he was certainly close there, UFC 100, the Vitor Belfort fight. And ironically, all 3 of them TRT users, but that's a different topic for a different day, right? That's a travesty, because he has been such a great star for the UFC, and I always thought that a title fight in England would have been a huge deal, and I think he's done enough to deserve it, but, you know, I don't know if he's going to get it at some point. Am I missing someone as far as European is concerned? Andrei Arlovsky? No. I'm kidding. Anyone?
I'm thinking obviously Jimmy Manua, who I interviewed before. Obviously he was a bit unfortunate against Alex. Felt comfortable in there until he got caught. He's quite confident, having spoke to him earlier, that he'll get back in that picture within a year's time. So,
you know, who's an interesting one to look out for? Gunnar Nelson. Gunnar Nelson. You know, I don't know if he'll be at 170, maybe 155. He's a little small for 170, but that's a really interesting one.
Absolutely, and you sort of mentioned in there Chael, and it just reminded me. Obviously, he's been through a few tribulations recently. It would appear that Chael was someone that you had built a rapport with through the various kind of analyst work that you'd done together on what was the show? UFC Tonight. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So I was wondering, since what has transpired, have you contacted him, and how's he doing? Is he all right? And are you hoping to see him back in the kind of commentator analyst role in the UFC?
I've talked to him a little bit via text. He seems to be doing okay. I mean, it's hard to gauge via text, and I think that this is obviously a traumatic thing. I mean, he was in many ways the face of the UFC on Fox. They're very unfortunate. I think he almost, forced their hand. Those are very serious PEDs that he is accused of taking, and he has accepted the responsibility, and I think that's very important. So I think that Fox had to do what they had to do, and I can tell you, I know they love Chael Sonnen. They still kind of love him, but I think they had to make a point. I think they made the right call, because this sport, if you're working as an analyst, and let's say Fighter X gets popped tomorrow, and he's sitting there and he's talking about him with that kind of history now, it raises a lot of questions. So time heals all wounds. People are given second, third chances all the time, especially in the United States. So let's see what happens. But I think this time off is probably good for him, and he was doing a lot, and juggling the fighting and the analyst stuff and all that. So, I don't think it's the last of Chael Sonnen. I think we'll see him again, but I think this break is probably good, and it was the right call.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask you as well, in terms of the title fights that are coming up, we touched upon obviously Alex and John Bones Jones. There's some intriguing ones coming up at the moment. Who, out of all the title fights, and which contender at this stage do you think poses the biggest threat, or who do you, how shall I rephrase that, who do you think stands the greatest chance of dethroning the champion in the forthcoming title fights?
Well, people love this question. The ones that come to mind, Chad Mendes, if he gets the title fight, that's the one I was thinking. Someone asked me, of all the champions out there, who is most likely to lose his belt by the end of the year after his next title defense, and I picked Mendes if I had to pick one. So that one certainly comes to mind. And I think Barao Dillashaw is interesting, just because, let's see what happens the second time around. I do think it's a little too soon to make that fight. I would have liked them to see, to book Dillashaw maybe against someone like Sun Tzu, maybe another fight. Barao fights a couple times, build him up, and now the rematch means more. That was an interesting choice. Gustafsson is certainly up there, but if I had to pick one, and I'm assuming this fight gets made, I'd pick Chad Mendes and Jose Aldo. Okay,
and I was going to ask then as well about your relationship with Dana. I mean, you always obviously you have the great access within the UFC. You conduct the most in-depth interviews with Dana and the best interviews with him. Is all rosy on the Dana front now?
All good.
It always generally is, but sometimes, it's not that you butt heads, but you have kind of a bit of a, banter, I would say.
Yeah. But I think that's okay. I mean, we can't always see eye to eye. I'm coming from one perspective, he's coming from another perspective. Hopefully it's always professional, it's always respectful, and that's fine. I mean, it can't always be peaches and whipped cream and strawberries and flowers and things like that. Dandelions. Can't always be like that. It shouldn't always be like that. It's not like I'm looking for the opposite, but again, we're coming from two different perspectives. So I'll always say that Dana has been he's been very kind to me, and he's always given me the time of day, and he gives us way more access than any other sports owner does. That I know for a fact. I mean, it's just amazing. The amount of time that he spends with the media and how open he is with the media. So even from when, one of my first events I ever covered, he gave me the time of day. My microphone broke right before our interview, and he stuck around. I went to buy a new microphone, came back, and he was still there and did the interview. And he didn't know who the hell I was. So I'll always have a lot of respect for him for everything that he's done for me. And, I like the relationship. I think it always keeps me on my toes. Always got to be ready. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. There you go. And I have no problem with it.
Fantastic. And then obviously one of the UFC stars at the moment, Ronda Rousey. Which there's 4 names really that are touted for a matchup with her at the moment. Off the top of my head, Kat Zingano, Holly Holm, even though obviously it's early days for her. Then of course Cyborg, controversial one, and I'm trying to think of the other. Gina Carano. Yep, that's the one. In an order, could you order which fight most intrigues you next for Ronda?
Most intrigues me is obviously Cyborg, without a doubt. Here's what I think they should do. Kat Zingano is fighting Amanda Nunes next in September. It's been a long layoff for her. What I would do is Ronda's next fight, have it be against Gina. Make this fight happen already. If it's not going to happen, let's stop talking about it. Let's see if they get to sign her. But they're obviously not going to have Gina fight someone else. It's somewhat of a crazy fight. She hasn't fought in 5 years. But if they're truly interested in making this fight, let's just have it already, you know? The Alexis Davis fight lasted 16 seconds, you know, and that was the top contender. Let's see how Gina does. So I would do that fight right away. Let's say it happens in December or January. Zingano-Nunes winner fights one more time between now and then they'll be the #1 contender. Cyborg is moving down to 135 in December. Let's see how that goes. If that goes well, I would sign her and then have her fight the winner, obviously, of Gina versus Ronda. You can have a rematch against Gina if she wins, or you have the big Ronda Rousey fight. Holly Holm, I'd still like to see fight 2-3 more times in the UFC against, you know, top UFC talent before we talk about her getting a title shot.
Okay, and then I suppose, again, another topic you touched upon on the MMA beat, the kind of marquee names in the UFC at the moment. Unfortunately, through retirement and injury, we kind of lost 2 marquee names in Anderson and George. Obviously, it's up in the air whether they're going to come back. The intention is that specifically with Anderson that he will, but what fights at the moment do you think are out there that could potentially be in inverted commas, super fight? Because I'll give you an example. Recently in England here, I don't know if you follow boxing very closely, but we had a fight at our national stadium, Carl Froch and George Groves, 80,000 people. Are there any fights out there, super fights, like you mentioned, Ronda and Cyborg maybe, that could fill a football arena or American football arena back in the States?
I don't know about a football arena, but as far as a super fight is concerned, I would have to think Anderson Silva versus Nick Diaz is the fight you need to make. This is the perfect time to make that fight. You know, GSP returning would be a very big deal, definitely in Canada. You know, I'm curious to see what kind of reception Cain Velasquez and Verdum have in Mexico. You know, maybe McGregor here in Ireland. But when I think of super fight, right away I think of Anderson Silva versus Nick Diaz. That, to me, is the perfect fight to make. Both of them want the fight. They're both coming off losses, layoffs. It's been a fight that Nick has wanted for a long time. Anderson wants to fight. If this doesn't happen, it would be very disappointing. So that, I mean, that feels like a super fight. 2 different weight classes, 2 big names, 2 former champions. Let's do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to end up, really appreciate your time today, Ariel. Obviously, we've discussed before your love of basketball. Yeah. It's kind of your love of basketball growing up, and you represented your country in the Maccabea Games, so you played at a decent level as well. Obviously, you know, you've become renowned in MMA media circles. You're one of the most recognisable faces. But is basketball being your earliest passion? Is that something maybe you'd like to get involved in the broadcasting side of that one day?
Wow, that's a tough question. I would love to work as a basketball journalist. That would be a lot of fun. But part of me also feels like it's fun keeping that as just my hobby. You know, that's what I'm a fan of, and I don't want to ruin it. You know, I have a very unhealthy obsession with the New York Knicks. I love them too much. I don't know why, because all they do is break my heart. But it's fun just keeping them as that thing. Like I said earlier, what I love about MMA, the characters, everyone from the managers to the promoters to the fighters, you don't get that in other sports. And you also don't get this thing where, you know, there are 50 events a year, but they all present different stakes. And they're all, this fight feels like the biggest deal in the world. And next week I'll be in San Jose, and that will feel like the biggest deal in the world. It's never dull. It's never mundane. We're never going through the motions. And let's be honest, in basketball, first of all, basketball players, as far as interviews are concerned, they're not the most exciting. I mean, they're a little going through the motions. They've been there, done that. These guys, they're so excited to talk to media. They're so open. They're so honest. I love it. So, you know, game 50, whatever, of the NBA season between the Knicks and Bucks, what's the big deal if they lose?
Yeah.
But I can tell you what, if Conor McGregor loses, if Carl Pendred loses on Saturday, if Paddy Houlihan loses, if Gunnar Nelson, if Brad Pickett loses, that is life-altering. And I love that. So I think I'm happy here. It would be fun, do it a few times, but I'm really happy doing this.
Okay, and do you think, obviously, at the time you got into MMA, the kind of accessibility, obviously you had to use your ingenuity to manufacture the opportunities that you did, and obviously had to work very hard to get to the position you're in now. But it was a very meteoric rise, you know, within a space of 3, 4, 5 years, you really rose to prominence. Do you think it would have even been possible in a sport like basketball, where there are so many hoops to jump through to even get to players?
No. Absolutely not. There's also way more people doing it, you know, way more people covering it. So it's very hard. It's hard to get that access. It's hard to do it. And this sport lends itself to that. I've always felt that MMA is such a great sport to cover because it lives online. You can't go, at least back then, and to a degree still now, you can't go, you know, on TV or in the newspaper and get the coverage that you want. And online, I just felt like, all right, no one's really covering it this way with a mic flag and dressing up and doing the interviews this way. Why don't I do it differently? And I almost programmed my own TV show. Yeah. You know, I'll give you the interviews, the pre-fight, the post-fight, the weigh-ins, all that stuff, and people would hopefully come to them. So I've always felt that it was the right sport at the right time. When I started, you know, really thinking about being an MMA journalist in 2001 when I was in college, I told my parents in 10 years this sport is going to be mainstream, and I want to be there when the executives are like, well, who are we going to get to actually cover the sport? Thankfully, so far it's worked, and it's worked because there weren't that many people doing it. So I don't think it would have worked if I picked any other sport, and very lucky. I don't even know if it would have worked if I would have tried to do it today, to be honest, you know, just coming out of nowhere. So yeah, very lucky.
So can we maybe just sort of evoke a little bit of what Conor said yesterday? Maybe there was a bit of visualization, was there,
Yes.
that this would happen?
I feel like a lot of what he said speaks to me. You know, just like how he's obsessed with. You know, he's watching a film and he's thinking about guard passing and whatnot. I'm the same way. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm thinking about it right now. What I have to do. I'm so obsessed with it. It's maybe unhealthy as well, but. I just want to try to cover the sport as best as I can, be as best as I can. You know, I came to this event, I was so excited, but I was also so nervous because I was like, man, I really need to live up to my own expectations. I need to make this a successful trip. I need to cover the crap out of this show. I need to make it right. So, you know, I guess I put some pressure on myself, but in a way that's probably a good thing.
And final question, obviously, as we mentioned, you are now, you know, your most recognisable face in MMA media.
What a title!
Absolutely. I was going to say, what's your objectives? What do you want to achieve within MMA media, say in 5-10 years time? Because, you know, essentially you've kind of rose to the top of the mountain. What is it that you want to? What's a legacy you want to leave behind?
I just want to, you know, cover the sport as best as I can, be a trusted voice, a trusted source, be viewed as, you know, an unbiased, a fair journalist. And, you know, I want to help, you know, I want to help people who helped the same way I was helped when I started. I love seeing, you know, I love coming here and seeing more people doing video stuff and, you know, treating the sport like a real sport and covering it, you know, professionally. I love that, and I think it's evolved. I see, I'm not saying that I have anything to do with this, but, you know, I see now the journalists when I started, they were kind of, you know, a little schlumpy. Now they're, you know, coming to the events dressed up. It's nice to see the sport growing. We're growing like the sport as a media corps. We're growing, and I'd like to see us stick more together, support each other. You know, sometimes I feel like everyone's out for themselves, and there's some of that obviously in every, you know, walk of life, every you know, field, because you want to be the best that you can be. But we need to unite more often than not, and work together. And I think if we take ourselves seriously, then the people we're covering will take us seriously. So I just want to be known as someone who, you know, covered the sport well and people liked his work, and that's it. I hope to do it for many, many years.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Ariel. Thanks a lot for your time today.